2 years. That's how long my daughter was missing. Every night, I hoped she'd come home. Then, one photo appeared on social media, and I saw her. Pale, terrified, trapped in a lie that almost killed her. What I discovered after that shattered everything I thought I knew about the people I trusted most. Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please leave a comment, and subscribe to Voice of Legends. I still remember the day she vanished as though it were etched into my bones. It started like any other ordinary afternoon, the sun lazily spilling through the living room blinds. I was in the kitchen finishing up lunch when I realized her bedroom door was closed. Normally, she'd be blasting music or laughing at some TikTok video with her friends, but that day the room was silent. I knocked gently. "Emma?" No answer. I called her phone. Straight to voicemail. I shrugged it off at first, thinking she might have wandered to the library or a friend's house, but hours passed and the unease grew into a gnawing dread that I couldn't shake. By the time the sun set, the fear had settled into my chest like a stone. I searched her room, her favorite spots in the house, even checked the backyard. Her backpack was still on her chair, her laptop open on the desk. Everything looked normal, except she wasn't there. I remember calling her friends, trying not to panic over the phone. "Maybe she's just messing with you," one of them suggested, but I knew Emma. She wasn't the type to disappear without a word. Not like this. The police were polite, I guess is the word. They filled out a missing persons report, but kept referring to her as a runaway. "Teenagers do this all the time," one officer said, trying to make it sound routine. But I didn't feel routine. I felt the world cracking beneath my feet. Friends and neighbors offered condolences, tips, and after a while, pitying glances. Time passed, weeks turned into months, and the case went cold. The world moved on. I didn't. Every night I sat in her room, running my fingers over the edges of her desk, inhaling the faint scent of her perfume lingering on the pillows. It was all I had left. I started searching online obsessively: social media, missing person forums, even the dark corners of the internet where whispers of trafficking and abductions lurk. I clung to every lead, no matter how small: a tip from someone who claimed to have seen a girl matching her description, a blurry image on a bus camera. Each turn brought hope, then disappointment. The pain was relentless, and yet I couldn't stop. I couldn't allow the story to end with silence. Then, 2 years later, it happened. One ordinary night, curled up on the couch scrolling through Instagram, I saw a photo that made me drop my phone. A smiling stranger, a casual group selfie, nothing extraordinary at first glance. And then I saw her. Behind them, in the corner of the frame, stood a girl with hollow eyes, an expression that wasn't her own, a ghost of the daughter I remembered. My breath caught, and I felt a cold, twisting fear settle into my stomach. Emma, my Emma. I clicked, zoomed, froze the image. She hadn't run away. She had been trapped, and that was the moment I realized everything I thought I knew about her disappearance was a lie. The next days were a blur of fear and frantic research. I traced the account that had posted the photo, followed comments, tags, and digital breadcrumbs. It led me to a world I didn't want to believe existed. People we knew, people I trusted, were part of it, or at least complicit in allowing her to be hidden. The girl in that photo wasn't just missing, she was silenced. I remember the nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining her scared, isolated, forced into a life I couldn't reach. Every instinct screamed at me to act, to rescue her, but I had no map, no instructions, only the image frozen on my screen and the raw fear that I could lose her forever if I made a misstep. I began documenting everything, every detail, every face, every post that could lead her to her. It felt like piecing together a puzzle blindfolded. Some nights I would look at her old bedroom, the untouched posters, her favorite stuffed animals, and feel both hope and despair. Hope because I could still see her there, in my mind, alive and whole. despair, because the reality might be far worse. Friends and family tried to comfort me, suggested therapy, suggested letting go. I couldn't. Letting go would mean accepting that I had failed her, and that was something I would never do. The investigation I conducted online became an obsession. Every account she might have used, every photograph, every post, there were moments when I felt her presence, small signs, echoes of who she was. I remember one post, a simple caption that said, "Missing home." It wasn't addressed to anyone in particular, but I recognized the pain behind it. That line became my lifeline. I knew she was reaching out in the only way she could, and I promised myself I would follow it wherever it led. It wasn't easy. I faced dead ends, threats, and disbelief. Some people told me to hire a private investigator, others said the police would find her eventually. But I had something more powerful, a mother's intuition. Every post, every subtle clue, I followed like a compass pointing home. And slowly, the pieces started to fit together. Names I hadn't recognized before, locations, repeated patterns of posts, even the way certain accounts interacted with hers. Each digital breadcrumb led me closer to her. Each revelation made my heart both heavy and hopeful. Then came the first real breakthrough, an account I had dismissed at first because it seemed trivial, almost childish. But the photos, the timestamps, the shadows in the background, they told a story of confinement. One image showed her sitting alone, wrists bruised, eyes hollow. Another had her in the background of someone else's selfie, much like the first image that had revealed her to me. These were not coincidences. These were cries for help, messages hidden in plain sight, and I knew I had to act carefully or I might push her further away. I began reaching out to people who might be connected, carefully, quietly, without alerting anyone who could be monitoring her. The fear was constant. Any wrong move could put her in more danger. But I had to try. I couldn't sit back while she remained trapped. Every morning I awoke with renewed determination, fueled by love and terror. I realized that the journey to save her would not just be physical, it would be emotional, a delicate balance between guiding her out and giving her the strength to reclaim herself. And through all of this, I learned something about myself. I learned that parental love is not just protective, it is a force that can pierce through fear, deception, and darkness. I learned to trust my instincts, to listen to the smallest signals, and to act decisively even when the path was unclear. And I realized that the world could seem indifferent, but determination fueled by love can move mountains, or at least it can bring a child back from the shadows.
Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to Voice of Legends. The days after I saw that first photo were a blur of adrenaline and fear. I barely slept, barely ate. Every notification on my phone made my heart jump, and every message felt like a possible clue or a trap. I remember pacing my living room late one night, phone in hand, staring at the same image of her over and over. Emma looked so small, so fragile, like someone had taken the light out of her eyes and left a shell. My mind kept racing. How did this happen? Who had her? Why? And most importantly, was she still alive? I tried to piece together a timeline from what I could see online. Her last known posts before disappearing had been innocent. Selfies with friends, school events, laughing at the simplest jokes. Then everything stopped. No posts, no messages, nothing. And now, 2 years later, these sporadic images appeared, as if someone wanted her to be seen, but not found. The thought made my stomach churn. Someone had controlled her life for that long, and no one noticed, no one fought for her. I reached out to one of her former friends, Sarah, who had moved to another city shortly after Emma disappeared. She was hesitant at first, scared even, but eventually she admitted something chilling. There had been strange people hanging around Emma's school, people she couldn't identify, watching her. At the time, no one had thought much of it. Teenagers are oblivious to danger until it's too late. But now, knowing what I know, every detail mattered. Every small observation could be a lifeline. The next step was gathering information on the accounts where Emma appeared. I spent hours cross-referencing names, locations, and faces. One account seemed particularly active, posting pictures with her in the background, always just out of reach. I noted patterns, certain cafes, certain neighborhoods, always fleeting glimpses. I mapped it all out on my laptop like a detective building a case. Each piece of information felt simultaneously terrifying and hopeful. I wasn't sure if I was chasing shadows or if this path could actually lead me to her. I realized I needed help, but I had to be careful. Bringing law enforcement back into it too early could alert whoever was holding her. I reached out to a private investigator discreetly, someone who had experience with missing teens. I explained the situation without exaggeration, showing them the photos and timelines I had painstakingly assembled. The investigator agreed to help, impressed with the details I had gathered. Together, we began looking for leads offline, tracing the digital breadcrumbs to physical locations. The first major breakthrough came when I recognized a familiar store in one of the photos, a small bookstore in a nearby town. It was a place Emma loved, the smell of paper and ink always calming her. The photo wasn't recent, but it gave us a starting point. We contacted the store owner under the guise of casual inquiry, asking if anyone resembling Emma had been there in the past months. It was a long shot, but the owner recalled seeing a girl matching her description with an older woman, someone who seemed overly controlling, always keeping her close, never letting her speak to anyone. That was enough. That was hope. I started to follow every lead from there. We spent weeks driving to towns, checking every cafe, bookstore, and park where she might have been. Every sighting was a flicker of light, brief and fleeting. One evening, I saw a girl from a distance in a shopping plaza. My heart stopped. She turned, and it wasn't her. But the hope it gave me kept me going, like oxygen in a suffocating room. I couldn't give up. Not now. Not when I was so close. Then came another photo. This one different from the others. It wasn't a group photo or a background appearance. It was a direct image of her, sitting on a porch, looking straight at the camera, her eyes wide and pleading. I could feel the fear in her gaze, as if she were screaming silently for me to come get her. I printed it, stared at it for hours, memorizing every detail, the chipped paint on the porch, the angle of the sunlight, the small tree in the corner. These small details became my map, the clues that could lead me to her. I began connecting the dots. There were recurring patterns, certain houses she appeared near, certain streets, a familiar blue car parked on more than one occasion. Each detail reinforced what I feared. She was being moved, carefully, strategically, to keep her hidden. Whoever was responsible was methodical, smart, and dangerous. But they underestimated a mother's determination. I started timing my visits to locations based on when photos were taken. I began waiting, watching, learning their routines, hoping to catch even a glimpse of her. Every small sign of her presence was emotionally overwhelming. I remember sitting in my car a rainy evening, staring at a tiny bookstore she had appeared in before. My fingers drummed on the steering wheel, and I whispered her name over and over, hoping she could hear me somehow. Tears ran down my face. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let her down again. Every step forward, no matter how small, was a step closer to her. And then something unexpected happened. Someone reached out to me. A stranger, anonymous, claiming to have information about Emma. At first, I hesitated. Was it a trap? A cruel joke? But the message contained details only her true captors would know. Locations, times, even specific patterns of movement. I realized this person might be trying to help her, maybe even give her a chance at freedom. But we had to act carefully. I coordinated with the investigator, planned an approach that minimized risk, and waited for the perfect moment. Finally, the day came when everything aligned. A new photo appeared, and I recognized the background instantly. A small apartment complex I had mapped out weeks earlier. The timing matched the routine I had been observing. We were ready. My hands shook as I drove to the location, heart hammering in my chest. I could barely breathe, anticipation and terror fighting at equal measure. I kept telling myself to stay calm, that any rash move could put her in more danger. But inside, I was a storm of fear, hope, and desperation. The hours leading up to that moment were tense, silent, and electric with anticipation. Every car that passed, every shadow, every sound made my heart race. And then, finally, it was time. We moved carefully, deliberately, ensuring her safety and ours. The door opened, and I saw her, my daughter, pale, frightened, but alive. The sight of her, the real Emma, brought tears I couldn't hold back. I ran to her, held her trembling body, and whispered over and over that she was safe now, that she was finally home. Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please leave a comment, and subscribe to Voice of Legends. Holding her for the first time in 2 years was surreal. She was smaller than I remembered, fragile in a way that broke my heart. Her hair fell in tangled strands over her pale face, and her eyes, once so bright and mischievous, were haunted, as if she had been carrying the weight of the world alone. I kept whispering her name over and over, letting her know it was me, her mother, and that finally she was safe. For a moment, she didn't respond. She just clung to me like I was the only solid thing left in her world. I could feel the shaking in her small frame, and I realized that safety wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, something emotional that had been denied to her for far too long. We didn't rush. I held her in my arms, letting her feel the warmth, the safety, the unbroken love that had never left her. I knew that the hardest part was just beginning. After 2 years, the trauma had seeped into every part of her being. She was wary of strangers, suspicious of anyone who smiled too widely, who reached out too eagerly. She flinched at sudden movements, and there were moments when she seemed lost in memories that she couldn't or wouldn't share. I reminded myself that patience was essential. Healing couldn't be rushed. Every gentle word, every touch, every assurance was a brick in the bridge back to the daughter I had lost. We moved her quietly from that apartment. The authorities were involved now, but we were careful to protect her from the people who had held her captive. She had been isolated, but not completely invisible. Social media, digital messages, and photos had kept a thread of connection alive, though faint, like a single candle flickering in a storm. I kept her phone off, away from prying eyes, and we stayed in a safe location while authorities investigated the complex network that had ensnared her. I remember feeling a mix of relief and rage, relief that she was finally with me, rage at the people who had stolen 2 years of her life. In the days that followed, Emma slowly began to speak. At first, it was just whispers, fragments of memories she was willing to share. She told me about the people who had hidden her, how they had manipulated her, the fear that had kept her silent. Every word was gut-wrenching, every detail a reminder of the danger she had endured. And yet, there were glimpses of the girl I knew, the humor, the intelligence, the fierce little spark that refused to be completely extinguished. I clung to those moments, celebrating the small victories as much as the big ones. I also had to face my own emotions: guilt, anger, exhaustion, it all crashing down. I replayed every moment, every missed sign, every time I could have done more. But I reminded myself that she had survived, and that survival was now my priority. Therapy became essential, not just for Emma, but for me. We began sessions together, learning to communicate again, to trust each other, to rebuild a relationship that had been fractured by fear and separation. Some days were harder than others. She would retreat into silence, her hand shaking, and I would feel the weight of those 2 lost years pressing down on me. But slowly, ever so slowly, she began to respond. There were moments that struck me the hardest, like the first night she slept in her own bed again. I lay awake in the other room, listening to her breathing, the sound so familiar yet foreign after 2 years. I wanted to be sure she was really here, really safe, before I allowed myself to relax. The fear that had gripped me for so long was now a shadow at the edges of every thought. I couldn't forget what had happened, but I also knew I couldn't let it define our lives going forward. The investigation into her disappearance revealed horrifying truths. The people responsible had been skilled at manipulation, creating a network of deceit that insulated them from suspicion. They had exploited trust, hidden behind smiles and polite words, all while keeping Emma isolated and controlled. Some were known to us, which made the betrayal cut even deeper. The realization that evil can hide in plain sight, even within familiar circles, was terrifying. But it also reinforced the importance of vigilance, love, and intuition. I had trusted my instincts, and they had led me to her. That truth became a comfort and a guide for the future. One of the most emotional moments came when we finally looked at the photos that had led me to her. We went through them together, one by one. At first, she was hesitant, even afraid, but slowly she began to identify herself in each image. There was pain, yes, but also a sense of reclaiming her story, piece by piece. We laughed softly at the ones where she had been captured mid-expression, unaware of the chaos surrounding her. We cried over the moments that revealed fear, helplessness, and isolation. That exercise, difficult as it was, helped her regain a sense of control, to see that the world hadn't completely forgotten her, and that she was more than the victim of these 2 years. Family and friends who had doubted, who had moved on too quickly, now saw the depth of the ordeal we had survived. Some were apologetic, others stunned into silence. Emma, despite everything, handled it with a maturity that amazed me. She understood the need for privacy, the dangers of oversharing, and the delicate balance between reclaiming her life and protecting herself from further harm. Watching her navigate this balance, even in small steps, was inspiring. It reminded me that resilience isn't about never breaking, it's about how you rise after each fracture. There were setbacks, of course: PTSD, anxiety, nightmares. She would wake screaming, remembering moments she had buried deep. Sometimes she refused to eat, refused to speak, refused to leave the house. Those days were brutal, but we faced them together. We developed routines, safe spaces, and signals for when fear overwhelmed her. Slowly, we introduced social interactions, starting with close family, then small trusted friends. Every success, no matter how minor, became a celebration, a milestone in her recovery and in the reclamation of her life. I also learned a lot about patience. Healing cannot be forced. Every attempt to rush her recovery backfired, often triggering fear or withdrawal. I had to let her lead, gently encouraging, gently supporting. We spent hours talking, sometimes about nothing at all, sometimes about the things she remembered. I listened more than I spoke, letting her set the pace. The quiet moments, the soft conversations before bedtime, the simple acts of everyday life became our anchors, the glue that slowly repaired the bond that fear and absence had threatened to break. Through it all, I kept thinking about the moral lesson hidden in the pain. Never ignore instinct, never dismiss fear, and never underestimate the power of love and persistence. If I had let go, if I had stopped searching, if I had allowed doubt or exhaustion to control me, Emma might never have been found. It reinforced something I already knew deep down. Love is not passive. It is active, relentless, and when necessary, fearless. And sometimes it's the only thing that can cut through lies, manipulation, and darkness to bring a child home. There were legal proceedings, too. The people responsible faced investigation, questioning, and eventually prosecution. Emma participated where she could, her voice finally included in decisions that directly affected her. The courtroom was terrifying, emotionally charged, and draining, but it was also empowering. She had been silenced for so long, but now her voice mattered, and that realization sparked a new level of confidence in her. It was a reminder that justice, while not immediate, is a necessary step in reclaiming life after trauma. As we continued to rebuild, small joys returned. Watching her laugh again, seeing her eyes sparkle with curiosity, enjoying hobbies she had abandoned, all of it was a slow but steady reclamation of life. I realized that happiness isn't something you reclaim in a day. It's stitched together with patience, trust, and countless tiny victories. And each victory reminded me why I never gave up, why I followed every breadcrumb, why I refused to accept the silence that threatened to bury my daughter. Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to Voice of Legends. The first weeks after Emma returned were a delicate dance between fear and hope. Every sound, every sudden movement, every new person she met was measured and tested. Even her own reflection sometimes startled her. The girl she saw in the mirror wasn't entirely familiar. She had grown into 2 years of experiences she never should have had, experiences that left marks deeper than I could immediately see. Yet beneath the fear, I caught glimpses of the girl I remembered, the one who loved to sketch, the one who laughed too loudly at inside jokes, the one who whispered secrets about the world that only she could see. Those moments reminded me why the search had never stopped, why I had followed every clue, every photo, every digital breadcrumb. We began rebuilding her life slowly, brick by brick. Therapy sessions became a cornerstone of our routine, not just for trauma, but for trust. I learned quickly that trust isn't restored overnight. It's earned day by day, moment by moment. Some days were progress, other days felt like setbacks. She would lash out at me for reasons I didn't understand, retreat into silence for hours, or wake in the middle of the night trembling. I learned to hold space for her emotions, even when they were confusing or painful. I learned to separate her trauma from our relationship, to love her fully without letting the past consume the present. School was another hurdle. Returning to the classroom after 2 years felt impossible, and yet she wanted to try. We worked with counselors and teachers to create a supportive environment, and I accompanied her the first few days. Walking through the halls, I could feel her tension, the way she flinched at sudden movements or avoided eye contact. But slowly, she began to reconnect with friends she had once known, forming bonds cautiously, deliberately. I realized that social reintegration after trauma was as much about observation and timing as it was about support. Emma learned to navigate it at her own pace, and I learned to trust her judgment even when it was different from my own. There were moments of revelation that broke my heart. She told me about the manipulations, the coercion, the ways the people hiding her had isolated her from the world. They had twisted her sense of reality, making her feel powerless, small, and unseen. Some nights I would hold her as she cried, recounting details that no child should ever endure. And every time I reminded her that she was not at fault, that none of it was her doing, and that she was stronger than they ever realized. That message, repeated endlessly, became our mantra. Survival is not shame. Survival is strength. Family dynamics were complicated too. Friends and relatives who had doubted, who had assumed she had run away, now tried to make amends. Some were genuine, others awkward, unsure how to reconcile 2 years of absence. Emma, surprisingly, navigated these interactions with a maturity I hadn't expected. She could forgive when ready, she could set boundaries when needed, and she could assert her voice in ways that protected her from further harm. Watching her claim her own agency after years of being controlled was one of the most powerful experiences of my life. The digital trail that had led me to her became a tool for understanding the magnitude of what she had endured. We sat together, looking at the images, the messages, the subtle cues that had gone unnoticed for so long. Some of the posts were terrifying, revealing the constant surveillance and manipulation she had experienced. Others were quietly defiant, showing small acts of resistance, moments where she had silently tried to assert control over her own life. I realized that even in captivity, Emma had retained a spark of herself, a resilience that kept her alive and guided me to her. There were nights I lay awake thinking about the people responsible. How could they live with themselves knowing the damage they had caused? The betrayal was personal. Some were people we had trusted, people who had smiled at us, offered help, or pretended concerned. It was a harsh lesson in vigilance, in the idea that evil can be disguised as familiarity. But it also reinforced why I had to fight, why I had to keep searching, why I had to trust my instincts even when the world doubted me. The lesson was bitter, but it was necessary. Love can see through deception, and persistence can outmatch cruelty. One day, Emma asked to go outside alone. It was a small request, but it terrified me. After everything, could I let her experience independence again? I agreed, slowly, with conditions. She had to call every 10 minutes, and I would watch from a distance. She stepped into the sunlight, hesitant at first, then gradually more confident. I watched her walk to the end of the street, glance back at me with a tentative smile, and continue. It was a small victory, but a monumental one. Freedom, even in tiny increments, was hers again. The media coverage of her story added another layer of complexity. Once authorities confirmed her safe return, reporters contacted us. Some wanted sensational headlines, others seemed genuinely concerned. Emma and I decided to share carefully, focusing on the lessons rather than the horror. We wanted people to understand the danger of coercion, the power of vigilance, and the strength of parental love. We wanted other families to see that hope is never wasted, that persistence matters, and that sometimes the smallest clue, a photograph, a message, a fleeting observation, can be the key to saving a life. During one particularly emotional therapy session, Emma revealed something that stayed with me for days. She said that in the darkest moments, she had imagined me, pictured me searching tirelessly, refusing to give up. That mental image had given her courage, a reason to endure, a reminder that she was not alone. Hearing that was both heartbreaking and uplifting. Heartbreaking because of the suffering she had endured, uplifting because it reinforced the bond that had carried us through years of fear and uncertainty. Love, I realized, is not just protective, it is a lifeline, a tether that can survive distance, deception, and despair. We also had to rebuild the everyday routines she had lost. School, hobbies, social interactions, even simple pleasures like walking in the park or choosing her own meals. Each new experience required guidance, patience, and reassurance. Some days she resisted, overwhelmed by anxiety, triggered by memories she couldn't always articulate. Other days she thrived, exploring her environment, laughing, reconnecting with friends, discovering joy again. Every small triumph felt monumental, every smile a victory over the darkness that had tried to consume her. As the weeks turned into months, I noticed subtle transformations. Emma's laughter grew easier, her expressions more natural, her trust in me more complete. She began sketching again, filling pages with images that reflected both pain and hope. She started talking about the future, college, friendships, dreams she had shelved during her captivity. It was a slow, fragile blossoming, but it was unmistakable. Life, she was learning, could be beautiful again. The journey was not linear. There were moments of regression, when nightmares returned, when she doubted her strength, when the weight of what she had endured threatened to overwhelm her. But we faced each moment together, reminding her of the resilience she had already shown, the love that surrounded her, and the truth that she had survived and would continue to survive against all odds. Each regression was a challenge, but also an opportunity to teach her that healing is messy, nonlinear, but always possible. I often reflected on the 2 years she was missing. Those years were stolen, yes, but they were also a testament to her survival, to the bond that could not be broken, and to the power of hope. I had learned to read digital clues, to trust my instincts, and to never stop fighting for someone I love. Emma had learned strength, endurance, and courage beyond her years, and together we had reclaimed a life that once seemed irretrievably lost. Life after Emma's return was a delicate balance between reclaiming normalcy and addressing the scars left behind. Every morning, I watched her move through the house, seeing her hesitation at small sounds or sudden knocks on the door, and I realized that the trauma wasn't just in her mind, it had seeped into every corner of her life. Simple routines like pouring a cup of cereal or opening the mailbox could trigger anxiety, and sometimes she froze, paralyzed by memories she couldn't fully explain. I learned quickly that patience wasn't just a virtue, it was survival. I had to let her regain control over her life, even if that meant slowing my own rush to reclaim what we had lost. The first few weeks were the hardest. She refused to eat meals alone, she would avoid certain rooms in the house, and even the sight of strangers, even kind ones, was enough to send her retreating into silence. Therapy became our lifeline. We met with a counselor who specialized in trauma recovery, someone who could help both of us navigate this delicate terrain. Emma slowly began to express herself, first in single words, then in short sentences, and eventually in stories that recounted the horrors she had endured. Each revelation was painful, but it was also a step toward reclaiming her voice, something that had been stolen from her for far too long. At night, she often woke screaming, haunted by memories she hadn't spoken of yet. I would hold her, whispering over and over that she was safe, that I was there, and that the nightmare was over. Sometimes she would sob uncontrollably, clinging to me as if the darkness might reach out and drag her back. In those moments, I realized how fragile the human spirit can be, yet how resilient. Emma had survived 2 years of fear, isolation, and manipulation, and now she was learning to survive again, this time in safety, with love, and with hope. One particularly painful evening, she revealed something I had feared. The manipulation had extended to her friends. Some had been instructed to avoid her, others coerced into silence, and a few had unknowingly contributed to her isolation. She spoke of betrayal in ways that made my heart ache. People she had trusted had been twisted into tools of her captivity. I felt rage, sorrow, and helplessness all at once, but I also felt immense pride. Despite the betrayals, Emma had survived, and she was beginning to reclaim her life on her terms. We began reintegrating small joys into her daily routine, walks in the park, sketching in her room, listening to music she loved. Each activity was a subtle reclaiming of life. But it wasn't just about joy, it was about trust, routine, and control. She had to rebuild confidence in her own decisions, in the world around her, and in me. I was careful not to overstep, to let her take the lead, even when I worried for her safety. Each successful small step reinforced that trust, and every setback reminded me that healing is rarely linear. School was another mountain to climb. Teachers and counselors were briefed on her history, and accommodations were made to ease her transition. But even with support, she struggled. Crowds, loud noises, and the constant unpredictability of teenage social life triggered anxiety. I remember walking her to class on the first day back, holding her hand tightly, feeling her trembling, and whispering encouragement. It was painful to watch her fear what should have been ordinary, but it was also inspiring to see her face the world despite the shadows lingering from the past. Slowly, she began reconnecting with old friends and cautiously building new relationships. Each interaction, no matter how brief, was a victory over the years of isolation she had endured. One day she came home from school with a notebook filled with sketches of her experiences. Some were dark, haunting depictions of fear and isolation. Others were tender, showing hope, love, and dreams for the future. She asked me to look at them quietly, without comment, just as a witness to her story. I realized that these drawings were her way of processing, of taking ownership of her narrative. It wasn't just art, it was therapy, a reclamation of the life that had been stolen from her. Each page told me more about what she endured and how incredibly resilient she had become. We also had to navigate the legal system. The people who had held her faced questioning and eventual prosecution, but the process was slow and emotionally draining. Emma participated when she could, her testimony powerful, her voice finally part of decisions that directly affected her future. Court dates were exhausting, sometimes re-traumatizing, but necessary. Each appearance was a reminder that justice, though delayed, was essential in reclaiming her life. And each time she returned home, alive and intact, I felt a mixture of relief, pride, and lingering fear that the system might fail her. Through it all, there were small but profound moments that made everything worth it. Watching her laugh again, seeing her eyes sparkle with curiosity, hearing her tell jokes or comment on mundane details of the day, these were victories. They were reminders that life, though fragile, could be reclaimed. I began to understand that healing is not a single moment. It is a series of incremental victories, a process of building resilience one day at a time. Even as we rebuilt, there were triggers that pulled us back to those dark days. A certain scent, a sudden noise, a stranger's gaze, each could send Emma spiraling into fear. But we learned to navigate them together. I became her anchor, but not her cage. I encouraged her independence while providing a safety net. Each challenge she overcame reinforced that she was not powerless, that she could make choices, and that the world wasn't entirely cruel. Her resilience grew, and with it, my hope that the years of darkness would not define her. One evening, we revisited the photo that had first led me to her. We sat together, silently, observing the image, and I watched her trace her fingers over the edges of the figure she had once been, small, frightened, and trapped. She didn't speak first, then slowly she whispered, "I remember being scared, but I also remember hoping you'd come." I felt tears stream down my face. That hope, that tether of love that had guided her through 2 years of captivity, was the same force that had driven me to never give up. We had found each other again, and in that moment we acknowledged the profound power of love and persistence. The process of recovery meant teaching her about boundaries and self-advocacy. She had been denied agency for so long that even small decisions felt monumental. We practiced asserting herself, saying no, and identifying danger signals. Slowly, she regained confidence in her own judgment. It was a delicate, painstaking process, but every small assertion of independence became a testament to her strength. She was no longer just surviving, she was beginning to live. Family and friends who had once doubted or abandoned her had to be approached cautiously. Emma learned to discern genuine care from performative concern. Some relationships were rekindled, others were permanently severed. She realized that trust is earned, not assumed, and that self-preservation sometimes requires hard decisions. Watching her make these choices, guided by her own judgment and reinforced by the support of those she could trust, was a powerful lesson in resilience, not just for her, but for me as well. Even as we found our rhythm, there were moments when I had to confront my own trauma. The guilt, the sleepless nights, the self-recrimination, they didn't disappear. I had spent 2 years haunted by what-ifs, by fear, by the idea that I had failed her. But seeing her reclaim her life, witnessing her strength and courage, reminded me that perseverance matters and that love, when relentless, can restore even the most fractured lives. I had fought for her survival, and now I was fighting to help her thrive. Even months after Emma returned, the echoes of those 2 years were everywhere. Sometimes it was subtle, a hesitation when someone approached her too quickly, the way she flinched at sudden noises, or the shadows in her eyes when she thought I wasn't watching. Other times it was undeniable. Nightmares that left her gasping, tears she couldn't contain, and moments of withdrawal so deep that nothing I said could reach her. Each time I was reminded of how carefully the people who had kept her captive had manipulated her world. Their control had been meticulous, calculated, and cruel. But I also saw how strong she had become. She had survived. Even months after Emma returned, the echoes of those 2 years were everywhere. Sometimes it was subtle, a hesitation when someone approached her too quickly, the way she flinched at sudden noises, or the shadows in her eyes when she thought I wasn't watching. Other times it was undeniable. Nightmares that left her gasping, tears she couldn't contain, and moments of withdrawal so deep that nothing I said could reach her. Each time I was reminded of how carefully the people who had kept her captive had manipulated her world. Their control had been meticulous, calculated, and cruel. But I also saw how strong she had become. She had survived, she had endured, and slowly, ever so slowly, she was learning to reclaim herself. We worked together to rebuild routines, to create a life that felt safe and familiar. Mornings began with shared breakfasts, evenings with quiet walks or storytelling. I made sure she had control over small decisions, what to eat, when to leave the house, how to structure her day. These small choices were monumental for someone who had spent 2 years having every decision made for her. Watching her embrace that autonomy, even in tiny increments, was a profound reminder that freedom is not given, it is nurtured. One afternoon, Emma asked to revisit her old neighborhood. I hesitated, afraid of triggers or potential encounters with people who might recognize her, but she insisted, saying she wanted to reclaim her spaces, to remind herself that they were hers, not the memories of fear they had become. Walking those streets together, I watched her pause at familiar corners, smile faintly at a tree she used to climb, and greet neighbors who remembered her with cautious warmth. She was navigating a world she had once known but had been ripped from, and each step forward was a declaration. She was no longer a victim, she was a survivor. School remained a delicate challenge. Despite the accommodations, Emma faced a reality of lost time, gaps in education, and the social complexities of adolescence. But she approached each obstacle with determination. I walked her through assignments, helped her practice social interactions, and celebrated every success, no matter how small. Slowly, teachers began to notice her resilience. Classmates began to see her not as the girl who had disappeared, but as someone remarkable for the courage she had shown. These victories, though incremental, became a foundation for rebuilding her confidence. Therapy sessions often revealed the depth of her trauma. She recounted memories in fragments, moments of fear, hunger, loneliness, and manipulation. But there were also moments of defiance, of tiny acts of resistance that had kept her spirit alive. I listened without interruption, without judgment, offering only support and affirmation. One day she whispered, "I knew you were looking for me. That thought kept me alive." I couldn't speak. I just held her, overwhelmed with relief, pride, and a lingering sorrow for the years she had endured alone. Those words became a touchstone for both of us, a reminder that hope, however faint, can endure even in the darkest circumstances. Family dynamics were another complex landscape to navigate. Some relatives had distanced themselves, unable or unwilling to confront the reality of what had happened. Others had been supportive from the start but were unsure how to help now. Emma's return forced everyone to reckon with their own roles, their assumptions, and their capacity for empathy. She set boundaries, deciding who could be part of her recovery and who could not. Watching her assert herself, often for the first time in her life, was both inspiring and humbling. She had learned lessons I wish no child ever had to learn, but she was turning them into strength. Social media, once a tool that had helped me locate her, became another challenge. She had to relearn how to interact safely, to protect her privacy, and to navigate relationships without fear. We created strict boundaries together, discussing what was safe to share, how to identify risks, and how to maintain control over her online presence. Slowly, she began to use it not as a tool of fear, but as a way to connect, to rebuild friendships, and to reclaim her narrative on her terms. These small digital victories were crucial. They reinforced that she could make choices and that the world, while sometimes dangerous, was not entirely hostile. One particularly poignant moment came when she returned to her art. Drawing had always been a refuge for her, and after 2 years, she tentatively picked up her sketchbook again. At first, her hands trembled, the images dark and chaotic, reflecting the trauma she had endured. But over time, her art transformed. It became expressive, bold, and hopeful, a visual testament to resilience. She began to sketch the world she wanted, not the world she had been forced to endure. Watching her creativity blossom again was a reminder that healing is not just about surviving, it is about reclaiming joy, curiosity, and agency. There were moments of anger, too. She became furious when she recounted the manipulation, the lies, the years stolen from her. Those emotions were valid, necessary, and even cathartic. I learned to sit with her anger without judgment, to validate her feelings while guiding her through them. We talked about the importance of channeling anger into empowerment rather than self-destruction. Over time, she began to understand that her rage was not weakness, it was a signal of survival, a reminder that she had endured horrors most people couldn't imagine and had emerged alive and determined. As the legal proceedings continued, Emma participated when she could, her voice finally central to decisions about her life. Each testimony, each encounter with the justice system was exhausting but empowering. She faced those who had wronged her with courage, reclaiming power that had been denied for too long. And while the courtroom was far from the perfect measure of justice, it provided a framework for accountability, a reminder that actions have consequences, and a step toward closure. We also navigated relationships outside the family. Friends who had once been distant returned cautiously, offering support and affection. Emma assessed each interaction carefully, learning to trust selectively, to read intentions, and to prioritize her own safety and well-being. She became remarkably perceptive, identifying those who genuinely cared and those whose concern was performative or superficial. Watching her develop this discernment was inspiring. She was reclaiming not just her life, but her ability to navigate the world safely and intelligently. There were small, intimate moments that left the deepest impressions. Morning coffee together, bedtime stories, quiet walks in the neighborhood. These became rituals, anchors in a world that had been chaotic and unsafe. I learned to cherish these moments, to recognize their fragility, and to understand that they were the foundation upon which we were rebuilding our bond. Every laugh, every shared memory, every gentle touch was a reminder that life could be beautiful again, even after unimaginable darkness. Slowly, Emma began to dream again. She spoke about college, about friends, about hobbies she had put aside. She began to write stories, to sketch landscapes, to imagine possibilities beyond survival. These dreams, small and tentative at first, became larger and more confident over time. They were proof that even after profound trauma, the human spirit can find light. And I realized that my role wasn't just to protect her, it was to nurture these dreams, to encourage them, and to help her reclaim a future she was once denied. Even as progress continued, we remained vigilant. Triggers, setbacks, and moments of fear were still present, but we had learned strategies to manage them. We communicated constantly, celebrated victories, and acknowledged setbacks without judgment. Our home became a sanctuary, a place where Emma could practice freedom, independence, and joy without fear. And slowly, the scars of the past began to coexist with the hope for the future. By this point, Emma's recovery had become a careful rhythm of small victories and unexpected setbacks. Some days were bright, filled with laughter, sketches, and simple pleasures that reminded me of the daughter I had once known. Other days, the shadows of her captivity would resurface. A sudden noise, a stranger's gaze, or even a familiar smell could trigger fear so intense it left her frozen, trembling, or retreating into herself. I quickly learned that healing is not linear. It is a series of incremental steps forward, interspersed with occasional steps back. Patience, I realized, was as vital as love. School had become a space of cautious reintegration. Teachers and counselors continued to support her, but the social challenges of adolescence were still daunting. She faced curious questions, whispers, and the weight of being the girl who disappeared. It was exhausting for her, and often I accompanied her on walks between classes, sitting in quiet corners, reassuring her that she was safe, that she was capable, and that she had the right to define herself beyond the trauma. Slowly, she began to navigate friendships again, cautiously reconnecting with old allies while learning to evaluate new connections with discernment. Each interaction, no matter how small, reinforced her growing autonomy. We also revisited the digital world that had once helped me find her. Emma needed to understand how to engage safely online, and together we developed boundaries. She learned to protect her privacy, recognize manipulation, and rebuild trust in communication without fear. It was difficult. There were moments when anxiety overwhelmed her, but over time she began to post selectively, interact safely, and reclaim a sense of control over the part of her life that had once been exploited. Digital empowerment became an essential part of her broader journey toward independence. Therapy sessions became an arena for exploration and healing. Emma would recount memories she had buried for 2 years, moments of hunger, confinement, emotional manipulation, and terror. Each revelation tore at my heart, yet each was vital for her recovery. We worked together to reframe her experience, not as weakness, but as survival. I reminded her constantly that enduring, resisting, and ultimately reclaiming her life was strength beyond measure. The counselor helped us navigate complex emotions, anger, fear, guilt, and grief. We learned to process trauma without letting it define us. There were nights that tested me more than any other. She would wake screaming, gasping for breath, eyes wide with fear. Sometimes she would cling to me, trembling as memories threatened to pull her back into those 2 years of captivity. I would hold her, whispering over and over that she was safe, that she was home, that the nightmare had ended. Each night I reminded myself that my presence, my love, and my patience were as crucial to her survival now as they had been when I had been searching for her. Small victories became monumental celebrations. One afternoon, Emma walked alone to the corner store for the first time since returning. I watched from a distance, heart pounding, every step she took measured and deliberate. When she returned, she held her head high, a faint smile on her lips, and said, "See, I'm okay." That tiny moment encapsulated everything: fear overcome, trust rebuilt, independence reclaimed. Moments like that reminded me that survival is not just enduring, but learning to live fully again. Family dynamics were also evolving. Some relatives had been slow to offer support, unsure how to approach a situation they had once dismissed. Others had been steadfast from the beginning, offering encouragement and understanding. Emma began to discern who could be part of her healing journey and who could not. She exercised boundaries, sometimes harshly, sometimes gently, but always wisely. Watching her take control of her relationships, asserting her needs, and protecting her emotional space was a powerful lesson in resilience and self-determination. Rebuilding routines was another crucial part of recovery. Mornings began with shared breakfasts and conversations, afternoons with school or supervised activities, and evenings with walks, storytelling, or quiet creative time. Even these simple acts became powerful anchors, grounding Emma in a world that at once felt unsafe and unpredictable. Each routine reinforced stability, safety, and predictability, helping her slowly reclaim her life one structured day at a time. Art remained her refuge. Her sketchbook became a canvas for both memory and imagination. Some drawings were dark and haunting, representing the trauma she had endured. Others were vibrant, full of hope, dreams, and visions of the future. She began to explore new styles, reintroducing color, light, and even humor into her work. Watching her creativity flourish was a reminder that healing is not only about addressing fear, it is about nurturing joy, curiosity, and self-expression. Anger surfaced often. She expressed fury at the people who had manipulated and betrayed her, at the years stolen, and at the friends who had failed to notice her absence. These emotions were valid, necessary, and cathartic. I learned to sit with her anger, to validate it, and to guide her in channeling it constructively rather than letting it consume her. Over time, she came to see that anger was not weakness. It was evidence of her survival, her awareness, and her refusal to be powerless. Legal proceedings continued, and Emma's participation was essential. Courtroom appearances were taxing, but each one reaffirmed her agency and her right to justice. She testified when she could, confronting those who had wronged her and reclaiming her narrative. Each successful step in the legal process reinforced that she was no longer a passive victim, but an active participant in shaping her life and ensuring accountability. Relationships with friends required careful navigation. Some peers had drifted away, others had been impacted indirectly by her disappearance, and some were entirely new. Emma learned to assess intentions, to engage selectively, and to protect herself from harm. Slowly, she began to form bonds based on trust, mutual respect, and genuine connection. Each successful social interaction strengthened her confidence and her sense of belonging. Even amidst progress, there were moments when the past intruded. Triggers, loud noises, sudden movements, or reminders of confinement occasionally pulled her back into fear. We had strategies, grounding exercises, deep breathing techniques, and verbal reassurance. Each setback reminded us that healing is ongoing, that trauma leaves a mark, but that resilience is equally present, ready to guide recovery when met with patience, support, and understanding. The small, quiet moments remained the most profound. Sitting together at the kitchen table, sharing stories about our day, reading books side by side, or walking through familiar streets, all of these became anchors of safety and normalcy. They reminded Emma and me that life could be ordinary again, even after extraordinary pain. These moments were proof that joy could coexist with the scars of trauma, that love could heal, and that life could continue in ways that were meaningful and whole. Emma's growth was visible in subtle yet profound ways. She began dreaming again about college, friendships, hobbies, and ambitions she had shelved during her captivity. She spoke about the future with cautious optimism, exploring possibilities without fear. Her creativity, her laughter, her curiosity, all were signs that she was reclaiming the life that had been denied to her. And each step forward reinforced that the 2 years she had lost, while painful, would not define the rest of her life. Even as she flourished, we remained vigilant. Triggers, moments of anxiety, and occasional regressions were inevitable, but together we had developed strategies to navigate them. Communication, patience, and reassurance became our tools. Slowly, she was learning to trust the world again, to assert herself, and to recognize that she was capable of protecting herself without fear. Her independence grew alongside her confidence, a testament to the resilience she had always carried within her. Through all of this, I reflected constantly on what had brought us back together. Love, persistence, and vigilance had guided me through 2 years of despair. My instinct had never wavered. My refusal to accept silence, my determination to follow even the faintest clues had led me to Emma. And as I watched her reclaim her life, I realized that love, when active and relentless, can triumph over fear, deception, and cruelty. Survival is not passive. It is nurtured, protected, and fought for with everything you have. By this stage, life with Emma had entered a rhythm that was both delicate and profound. The constant vigilance, the emotional turbulence, and the careful rebuilding of trust had begun to coalesce into a sense of stability. Yet beneath that fragile calm, I was always aware of the shadows that lingered, triggers that could surface fear, memories that could resurface in nightmares, and the weight of the 2 lost years that could never fully be erased. Every day was a negotiation between fear and hope, between the trauma that had shaped her and the resilience that was now defining her. School became a focal point of both challenge and triumph. Emma was no longer just the girl who had disappeared. She was the girl who had endured, survived, and was reclaiming her life. Teachers and counselors continued to support her, providing accommodations and safe spaces. Friends who had returned approached cautiously, aware of her trauma and respectful of her boundaries. Emma navigated this terrain with remarkable poise, asserting herself when necessary, retreating when overwhelmed, and learning to recognize both supportive and harmful behaviors. Each successful interaction reinforced her confidence and her sense of agency, proving that even after profound adversity, trust and connection could be rebuilt. Therapy remained central to her recovery. Sessions often revolved around unpacking memories she had long suppressed, moments of fear, hunger, isolation, and coercion. These were difficult for both of us, but they were also vital. We learned together how to process trauma, reframe her experiences, and develop strategies for coping with triggers. One afternoon, she confided that the most painful aspect had been feeling invisible, unheard, and powerless. I reassured her that she was never invisible to me, that every search, every whispered prayer, every sleepless night had been for her. These affirmations became part of our daily ritual, reminding her of her intrinsic value and her undeniable strength. The legal process continued to unfold in the background. Those responsible for her captivity were being investigated and ultimately faced prosecution. Emma participated where she could, her testimony reclaiming the narrative of her life. Each courtroom appearance was draining but empowering. She was no longer a passive victim, but an active participant in the pursuit of justice. Watching her confront the people who had manipulated her while remaining safe and supported was a testament to her courage and the resilience she had cultivated. Each small victory in court mirrored the victories we celebrated at home, proof that perseverance matters and that the power of truth can restore what darkness tried to steal. Even as she grew stronger, setbacks were inevitable. Nightmares returned sporadically, often triggered by sudden noises, shadows, or emotional stress. On those nights, I would hold her close, whispering assurances, letting her cry and allowing her to feel safe again. These moments reminded me that trauma leaves marks that time alone cannot erase. Healing is not about forgetting, it is about creating a space where fear no longer dictates daily life, where trust can be rebuilt, and where resilience is nurtured until it becomes second nature. One of the most significant breakthroughs came when Emma asked to return to some of the places she had once frequented before her disappearance. She wanted to reclaim her spaces, to reassert ownership over her environment. Walking with her through familiar streets, parks, and local shops, I watched as she tentatively explored, hesitated, and then slowly grew confident. Each step was a declaration. She was no longer defined by fear, she was no longer bound by the past, and she had the right to inhabit the world on her own terms. Witnessing her reclaim autonomy in these small but meaningful ways was profoundly moving. Art continued to serve as both refuge and therapy. Emma's sketchbook transformed from dark, chaotic depictions of fear into vibrant, expressive works filled with hope, imagination, and reclaimed joy. She began experimenting with color, perspective, and narrative, turning her art into a medium through which she could process the past while envisioning a future of her choosing. Watching her creativity flourish reminded me that healing is not only about surviving, it is about thriving, exploring, and rediscovering the facets of life that trauma had tried to steal. Anger surfaced frequently, often as a raw response to the injustices she had endured. Emma expressed fury toward those who had manipulated her, lied to her, or abandoned her. Rather than suppressing these emotions, we learned to acknowledge them, process them, and channel them into constructive actions. Anger became a tool, not a burden, a recognition of her experiences, and a marker of her reclamation of power. In these moments, I reminded her that rage in the face of injustice is not weakness, but evidence of resilience, courage, and self-preservation. Relationships with peers and family were carefully navigated. Emma learned to assess intentions, set boundaries, and engage selectively. Some bonds were rekindled, others were severed permanently, but each decision was hers to make. Watching her reclaim agency in her relationships, asserting her needs, and protecting her emotional space was inspiring. She was learning that trust is earned, that connection requires discernment, and self-protection is a form of empowerment. We also addressed the ongoing challenge of social media and online presence. Digital spaces had once played a critical role in locating her, but they had also been a source of vulnerability. Together, we developed strategies for online safety, privacy, and selective sharing. Emma gradually regained confidence in her digital life, reconnecting with friends, sharing her experiences cautiously, and asserting control over how and when she was seen. These steps were symbolic of her broader journey, reclaiming voice, agency, and autonomy in every aspect of life. Small, intimate moments became the most meaningful markers of recovery. Morning coffee together, evening walks, quiet conversations, and bedtime rituals were not just routines, they were anchors of safety, trust, and love. Each shared moment reinforced that life could be ordinary again, that joy could coexist with scars, and that love could heal wounds left by deception and fear. These quiet victories were as significant as any courtroom triumph or school achievement, proving that resilience is nurtured in the everyday as much as in moments of dramatic action. Emma began to dream again. College, friendships, hobbies, and ambitions became topics of discussion, imagination, and planning. She approached the future with cautious optimism, exploring possibilities she had once shelved. Witnessing her envision a life beyond survival was a profound reminder that even after profound trauma, hope can flourish. Each aspiration, each plan, and each expression of creativity reinforced that the 2 years of fear and isolation would not define her, nor would they dictate her potential. Even as progress solidified, vigilance remained necessary. Triggers and moments of fear could still surface unexpectedly, but Emma now had tools, strategies, and a support system to navigate them. Grounding exercises, open communication, and practiced coping mechanisms allowed her to respond to fear rather than be consumed by it. Slowly, she learned to trust herself, her instincts, and her resilience, reclaiming autonomy not only in action, but in thought and emotion. Reflection became a constant companion. I often thought about what had led us to this point, what had kept me searching, and how love, persistence, and intuition had guided me through 2 years of uncertainty and despair. Emma's survival was a testament not only to her strength, but to the relentless force of a parent's love. I realized that hope is an active choice, a daily commitment, and a powerful tool for navigating even the darkest circumstances. It is the tether that can guide someone home even when the world has abandoned them. By now, Emma and I were settling into a rhythm of recovery, one that balanced caution with freedom. The trauma of the past 2 years still cast long shadows, but we were learning to live alongside them rather than be defined by them. Even simple activities, a walk to the park, a shared meal, or an outing to a local shop required vigilance. There were still triggers. A sudden noise, a passing stranger, or even an unexpected phone call could pull her back into fear. But with each experience, she grew stronger, learning that she could face the world again without being consumed by it. School had become a testing ground for her resilience. Teachers and counselors were understanding, friends were tentative but supportive, and Emma gradually regained a sense of belonging. She faced curiosity, questions about her absence, and occasional whispers, yet she handled it with remarkable maturity. I often walked her to school, observing how she navigated social dynamics, made small choices, and reclaimed confidence in her voice. Each successful day was a triumph, a reinforcement that she could define herself beyond the label of the girl who disappeared. Therapy remained a cornerstone of her healing. Sessions were emotionally charged, filled with moments of pain, reflection, and gradual empowerment. She revisited memories of confinement, manipulation, and fear, learning to process them without letting them dictate her present. We practiced grounding techniques, mindfulness, and verbalization of emotions. She began to reclaim agency over her experiences, acknowledging what had happened without being trapped by it. One afternoon, she said softly, "I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm learning to live." That statement, so simple yet profound, encapsulated everything we had worked toward. Art continued to be her refuge. Her sketchbook evolved, reflecting both her trauma and her growing hope. Dark, jagged images of fear were slowly replaced with colorful, expressive works that celebrated life, imagination, and personal agency. She began experimenting with narratives, creating characters who overcame obstacles and reclaimed their worlds. Watching her creativity flourish was a reminder that resilience is not only about endurance, but about reclaiming joy, agency, and self-expression. Art became a bridge between her past and her future, a tool for understanding and controlling her own story. Anger was still present, often surfacing unexpectedly. She expressed fury at the people who had stolen 2 years of her life, manipulated her, or coerced others to participate in her isolation. These emotions were not something to suppress, they were a signal of survival, a recognition of injustice, and a catalyst for empowerment. I learned to sit with her anger, validate it, and guide her in channeling it constructively. Over time, she began to see that acknowledging anger was a form of reclaiming control, a necessary step in transforming trauma into strength. Family relationships were evolving too. Some relatives who had been distant were now tentatively re-entering her life, offering apologies and support. Others remained outside her circle, unable to meet the trust required. Emma's ability to set boundaries, assert her needs, and discern genuine concern from performative care was remarkable. She was learning that trust is earned, not assumed, and that self-preservation sometimes requires difficult decisions. Watching her navigate these dynamics with intelligence and courage was inspiring. She was no longer a passive participant in her life, but an active architect of her recovery. Social reintegration was an ongoing challenge. Emma cautiously engaged with friends, evaluated intentions, and rebuilt connections selectively. Each interaction required discernment, patience, and confidence. Over time, she became more comfortable asserting herself, making choices, and maintaining relationships that were supportive rather than harmful. Small successes, a conversation without anxiety, a shared laugh, or an invitation accepted, became milestones in her ongoing journey of reclaiming normalcy. Digital presence remained a sensitive topic. The same tools that had led me to her had also been a source of vulnerability. Together, we established rules for digital safety, privacy, and selective sharing. Emma began to interact online with control and purpose, learning to recognize threats, assert boundaries, and reclaim agency over her digital identity. This process was symbolic of her broader journey, reclaiming voice, agency, and personal power in every area of life, from physical spaces to virtual ones. Daily life continued to be shaped by small but meaningful routines. Morning breakfasts, afternoon walks, evening sketches, and quiet conversations became anchors of stability. These simple acts were not just comforting, they were transformative. They reminded Emma that life could be ordinary, predictable, and safe, even after trauma had shattered her world. These rituals became proof that joy, security, and love could coexist with memories of fear and loss. We also revisited the photo that had led me to her. Looking at it together, she traced her fingers over the figure of the girl she once was, frightened, small, and trapped. I remember being scared, but I also remembered you were looking for me. I held her, overwhelmed by relief and sorrow, knowing that her hope had sustained her through darkness. That single statement was a reminder that love, persistence, and belief can survive distance, deceit, and danger. It had been the lifeline that guided her back to me, and now it was a foundation for rebuilding her life. Freedom, even in small increments, became a recurring theme. Emma practiced independence with increasing confidence. Short walks alone, independent choices at school, and decisions about her personal space became exercises in empowerment. Each successful act reinforced her autonomy, her confidence, and her trust in herself. Slowly, the world that had once felt hostile began to feel navigable again, and she began to reclaim life on her terms. We also revisited grief, the mourning of 2 years stolen, friendships lost, and experiences she would never recover. Grief was intertwined with hope, teaching her that it is possible to acknowledge loss while still moving forward. We discussed memory, resilience, and the value of reclaiming joy despite the past. Each conversation, though sometimes painful, reinforced her capacity to heal and adapt. Through all of this, I reflected constantly on what had brought us to this point. My relentless search, my refusal to accept silence, and my instinctive trust and hope had led me to Emma. Her survival was a testament to her own strength, but also to the unyielding bond of parental love. I realized that love is not passive, it is active, persistent, and fearless. It is the thread that can guide someone through darkness and back into the light. Emma began to dream again. She spoke about the future with cautious optimism, envisioning college, friendships, hobbies, and aspirations she had shelved during captivity. These dreams, once distant and tentative, became increasingly concrete, a testament to her growing resilience. Each aspiration she pursued was a declaration she would no longer be defined by fear, manipulation, or loss. She was reclaiming her life, piece by piece, day by day. Even with progress, vigilance remained necessary. Triggers could still surface unexpectedly, moments of fear could reemerge, and setbacks were part of the process. But Emma now had tools, strategies, and support to navigate these challenges. Grounding exercises, verbal reassurance, and practiced coping mechanisms allowed her to respond rather than react, empowering her to reclaim control over her body, mind, and emotions. The small, quiet moments remained the most profound. Sharing coffee, discussing books, sketching together, or walking side by side became anchors of love and stability. They reminded us that recovery is not always marked by dramatic events, but often by ordinary, meaningful connections that restore trust, security, and hope. These moments, repeated daily, were as vital to healing as therapy, legal victories, or social reintegration. By now, Emma had begun to reclaim a life that felt both familiar and new. The shadow of the 2 years she had been missing still lingered, but she was learning to coexist with it rather than be consumed by it. Even ordinary routines, a morning cup of tea, a walk to the corner store, quiet evenings spent sketching, were exercises in trust, courage, and gradual empowerment. Each small act was a declaration of her survival, a conscious choice to live fully despite the trauma that had shaped her. School had become a critical proving ground. Teachers and counselors offered support and accommodations. Friends began to approach with caution and care, and Emma slowly reestablished herself as more than the girl who had disappeared. She faced curiosity, whispers, and occasional misunderstanding, yet she navigated it all with remarkable poise. I often accompanied her, quietly observing, ready to intervene if necessary, but mostly learning to trust her judgment. Each day she faced her world without being paralyzed by fear, each small victory reinforcing her sense of agency and self-worth. Therapy sessions had evolved. Early on, they had been about survival, recounting trauma, and regaining trust. Now, sessions were focused on growth, resilience, and self-expression. Emma explored her experiences with increasing clarity, articulating emotions she had once buried, and discovering strategies to cope with lingering anxiety. One day, she said softly, "I'm starting to see myself outside of what happened to me." That single line, so quiet yet profound, marked a turning point. She was no longer only a survivor, she was beginning to define herself on her own terms. Art remained a lifeline. Her sketchbook had transformed from a collection of dark, fragmented depictions into a vibrant exploration of imagination, hope, and reclaimed agency. She began experimenting with color, perspective, and narrative, creating works that not only reflected her past, but also projected a vision of her future. Watching her creativity flourish reminded me that recovery is not just about enduring, it is about thriving, reclaiming joy, and reconstructing identity. Each drawing was a step forward, a tangible sign that life could be beautiful again. Anger, still present, was now harnessed in ways that were constructive rather than consuming. Emma expressed her fury toward those who had manipulated her, coerced her, or abandoned her. Rather than letting it fester, we worked to channel it into strength, self-assertion, and protective strategies. Anger became a tool, a marker of empowerment, and a reminder that acknowledging injustice is part of reclaiming control. Through this process, she learned that strength comes not from suppression, but from embracing and transforming emotion into action. Family dynamics continued to shift. Some relatives had returned, offering tentative support, while others remained outside her circle, unable to meet the trust required. Emma exercised remarkable discernment, choosing carefully who could be part of her recovery. She asserted boundaries firmly yet thoughtfully, demonstrating maturity beyond her years. Watching her navigate these relationships was inspiring. She was no longer passive, but active, shaping the world around her to protect her well-being and foster growth. Reintegration into social life was gradual but steady. Friends were cautious, some returning slowly, others forming new connections. Emma approached each relationship deliberately, assessing intentions, setting boundaries, and nurturing trust. These interactions, though small, became powerful milestones. Each successful conversation, each shared laugh, each decision to engage reinforced her autonomy and confidence. Over time, she began to understand that meaningful relationships could exist even after betrayal, and that trust, while earned slowly, could be rebuilt. Digital presence was a continued focus. The online world, which had once aided in finding her, had also posed risks. Together, we developed clear strategies for privacy, safety, and selective sharing. Emma cautiously re-engaged, learning to assert control over her digital identity. These small victories were symbolic of her broader journey, reclaiming voice, agency, and autonomy across every area of life. Each post, message, or interaction was a conscious choice, reinforcing that she could exist safely, fully, and independently. Daily life continued to be punctuated by both small victories and subtle setbacks. Nightmares still occurred occasionally, triggered by memories or sudden events. On those nights, I would hold her, whispering assurances and allowing her to release the fear that had been bottled for years. Gradually, she learned to navigate these moments with techniques and strategies she could rely on, building confidence in her ability to manage the lingering shadows of her trauma. Each small triumph reinforced the truth that healing is ongoing, that strength is cultivated, and that freedom is reclaimed in increments. We revisited the photo that had led me to her countless times. Each viewing was emotional. She traced the figure of her younger, frightened self, acknowledging both fear and hope. She whispered, "I remember thinking you'd come for me." Those words were more than a reflection on her endurance. They were a testament to the bond that had sustained us both. Love, persistence, and belief created a lifeline, a tether that guided her back into safety and eventually into empowerment. That bond had been tested, yet it remained unbroken. Freedom in all its forms became a recurring theme. Emma practiced independence cautiously, short walks alone, decisions about school and friends, and asserting control over her personal space. Each act of autonomy was both empowering and terrifying for her, but also a clear sign of progress. She began to reclaim ownership of her life, learning that she could make choices without fear and that the world, though sometimes dangerous, was navigable. Each success bolstered her confidence and strengthened her resilience. Grief was a constant companion, intertwined with hope. She mourned the years lost, friendships faded, and opportunities stolen. But these moments of grief were balanced by triumphs, regained trust, reclaimed joy, and growing independence. I reminded her that acknowledging loss does not diminish hope. It can coexist with renewal, resilience, and the reclamation of life. She began to understand that recovery is not about erasing pain, but about creating a future in which pain no longer dictates the present. Reflection became central to both of us. I often thought about the journey that had brought us here, the relentless search, the instinctive refusal to give up, and the enduring hope that had guided me through 2 years of despair. Emma's survival was not only a testament to her own courage, but to the relentless force of parental love. I realized that love is never passive. It is active, persistent, and fearless. It is the force that can guide someone home even when the world has abandoned them, and the same force that can help rebuild a life once thought lost. Emma's dreams grew bolder. College, friendships, hobbies, and aspirations began to fill her conversations. These aspirations, once tentative, became actionable plans, a reflection of her growing confidence and her ability to envision a life beyond survival. Each aspiration was a declaration she would no longer be defined by fear, manipulation, or loss. She was reclaiming her life fully, day by day, moment by moment. Even with these gains, vigilance was necessary. Triggers, anxiety, and occasional setbacks reminded us that healing is a process, not a destination. Yet Emma now possessed tools, strategies, and a support system to navigate challenges. Grounding exercises, practiced coping mechanisms, and open communication allowed her to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. Slowly, she reclaimed not just her actions, but her mind and emotions, asserting autonomy over every aspect of her life. The quiet, everyday moments were the most meaningful. Sharing coffee, discussing books, sketching together, or walking through familiar streets, all of these became anchors of love and security. They reminded us that healing is often found in ordinary moments, repeated and sustained, rather than dramatic events. Each day, these moments reinforced stability, trust, and the profound power of connection. By the time we reached this point, Emma and I had learned to navigate a life that balanced vigilance with hope, fear with courage, and trauma with resilience. The 2 years she had been missing were scars we could never erase, but they no longer defined her. She had reclaimed her voice, her agency, and her sense of safety. What had once felt impossible, trusting the world, dreaming of the future, laughing freely, was now becoming reality, one deliberate step at a time. The final stretch of her recovery involved consolidating all that we had rebuilt: trust, routines, relationships, and independence. School had become a safe space where teachers respected her boundaries, friends approached with care, and she could engage socially without being overwhelmed. Each success, no matter how small, reinforced her confidence. One afternoon, she walked alone to the library, returned with a smile, and told me she had spoken up in class for the first time in months. That moment, so ordinary yet monumental, reminded me that freedom is measured not just in dramatic rescues, but in the quiet victories of everyday life. Therapy sessions, which had once been centered on survival and trauma processing, now focused on growth and the future. Emma explored her ambitions, her creativity, and her capacity for connection. She spoke openly about the manipulation she had endured, the ways that it shaped her, and the ways she was learning to reclaim her identity. I sat beside her, listening, affirming, and occasionally holding back tears of pride. Her words were not just reflections, they were declarations of independence, proof that the darkness of the past 2 years no longer dictated her present. Art continued to be a sanctuary. Emma's sketchbook had evolved into a narrative of resilience, filled with color, life, and imagination. Her drawings depicted characters overcoming obstacles, reclaiming spaces, and finding joy, mirroring her own journey. She began to share her art cautiously, posting some pieces online and showing others to close friends. Each act of sharing was both brave and empowering, a way of asserting control over her story and transforming pain into beauty. Her creativity became a bridge between the past and the future, a symbol that she could create her life anew. Anger, once raw and overwhelming, had become a source of insight and empowerment. Emma acknowledged the injustice she had endured, used it to set boundaries, and transformed it into strength. She learned that anger does not have to be destructive. It can be a signal of survival and a guide towards self-protection. I marveled at how she had transformed emotions that could have consumed her into tools that fortified her independence. Family relationships had settled into a new equilibrium. Some relatives remained distant, unable to reconcile with the trauma, while others had become supportive pillars. Emma had learned to choose her connections wisely, asserting her needs and honoring her emotional safety. Watching her navigate these relationships with clarity and confidence was inspiring. She was no longer simply surviving within her family. She was thriving, shaping connections that were meaningful and safe. Social life had also begun to blossom. Friends returned cautiously, new relationships formed, and Emma gradually learned to trust selectively. Each successful interaction was a milestone, a reminder that she could engage with the world safely. One evening, she laughed freely over a shared joke with a friend, a sound that had been absent for years. It was a moment of triumph, a reminder that joy could coexist with scars, and that even after profound trauma, human connection could be rebuilt. Digital spaces, once a source of danger, had become arenas of empowerment. Emma carefully managed her online presence, connecting with supportive peers and selectively sharing her story. Each post, message, or interaction was a deliberate act of autonomy, reinforcing her ability to reclaim control over her life. It was symbolic of a larger truth. The world could no longer manipulate or define her. She had learned to navigate it with wisdom, courage, and vigilance. Nightmares and triggers still appeared occasionally as reminders of the past, but Emma had developed strategies to manage them. Grounding techniques, reassurance, and a strong support network allowed her to face fear without being consumed by it. Over time, these incidents became less frequent, less intense, and less disruptive, evidence that resilience, though hard-won, was now firmly established. She had learned to coexist with memory without being enslaved by it. One afternoon, we sat together looking at the photo that first led me to her. She traced her fingers over the figure of the young, frightened girl she once was. "I remember being scared, but I also remembered you were looking for me. That kept me alive." I held her tightly, tears streaming, overwhelmed by pride, relief, and love. That simple statement contained the essence of our journey. Hope, love, and persistence can survive even the darkest circumstances. It had been the lifeline that brought her back, and now it was the foundation for the life she was reclaiming. Reclaiming freedom in everyday life became the clearest marker of progress. Emma practiced independence, made her own decisions, and navigated the world on her terms. From choosing what to wear to deciding where to walk, each act of autonomy was a victory. She learned that life was not something to fear, but something she could inhabit fully, safely, and with intention. The girl who had once been hidden and controlled was now charting her own path, a testament to resilience and courage. We also confronted grief, the mourning of lost years, stolen experiences, and fractured friendships. Yet grief coexisted with hope. We acknowledged loss without letting it define our present, recognizing that recovery is not about erasing pain, but about reclaiming life despite it. Emma learned that joy and sorrow could coexist, that she could honor the past while embracing the future. Each step forward was a triumph of human spirit and perseverance. Reflection was constant. I often thought about what had led us here, the relentless search, the refusal to accept silence, the belief that hope could endure. Emma's survival was a testament to her own courage, but also to the enduring bond between parent and child. I realized that love is never passive. It is active, unwavering, and brave. It can sustain through fear, betrayal, and danger, and it can guide a lost child back to safety, back to life, and back to themselves. Emma's dreams were finally taking shape. College, friendships, creative pursuits, and personal goals were no longer distant fantasies, but attainable realities. She spoke with the future with cautious optimism, planning steps towards independence and fulfillment. Each aspiration was a declaration she would not be defined by fear or loss. She had reclaimed agency over her life, and each day, each choice was a reaffirmation of that freedom. Even with progress, we remained mindful that healing is ongoing. Triggers, moments of fear, and residual anxiety were part of the process, yet Emma now had tools, strategies, and confidence to navigate them. Grounding exercises, coping mechanisms, and open communication allowed her to respond rather than react, reclaiming autonomy over both mind and body. She had transformed trauma into resilience, fear into strength, and loss into determination. The most profound moments were quiet and ordinary. Coffee shared at the kitchen table, evening walks, sketching together, and bedtime conversations. These acts were anchors, proving that healing is often found in ordinary, repeated rituals rather than dramatic moments. They reinforced trust, stability, and the enduring power of connection. Each day became a reminder that joy, love, and security could coexist with scars, that recovery was possible, and that life could be meaningful again. Finally, one evening, as Emma and I sat together reviewing her art and sharing stories from our day, she looked up at me and said, "I feel like I'm really living now." That statement, so simple yet profound, encapsulated everything we had endured: the search, the despair, the triumphs, and the resilience. 2 years of darkness had not destroyed her. Love, persistence, and courage had guided her back. And now, for the first time in years, she was not just surviving. She was alive, free, and whole. Looking at her, I realized that this journey, painful, terrifying, and uncertain, had a purpose beyond survival. It had taught us both the depth of love, the power of persistence, and the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. Emma's story was a testament to hope, that even when a child disappears into darkness, relentless love and unwavering belief can bring them back, that even after betrayal and manipulation, life can be reclaimed, that even the deepest scars can coexist with joy, and that healing is possible when courage meets love. Emma had vanished for 2 years, but she had returned not just alive, but stronger than ever. And as I held her close, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breathing, I knew that the journey was complete, not because the past had vanished, but because we had emerged whole, resilient, and ready to embrace the life we had fought so hard to reclaim. The moral of our story was clear. Love, persistence, and hope are forces more powerful than fear, manipulation, or time. Even in the darkest moments, they can guide a lost child home. Even in the most unbearable despair, they can illuminate the path forward. And even when life feels shattered, courage and love can rebuild it, piece by piece, moment by moment, until it becomes something beautiful once more.